If I sound out of breath, let me apologize in advance to you all. I'm recovering at the time from an illness because I pre-recorded all of this. Okay. So here's my thing. My advice to you is, if this is the first time on my channel or the first time in this series, because I'm doing a series all November, please go back to the video that I put out on November 1st discussing the Blumenbach racial categories, entitled Revisiting Blumenbach. Because based on how I'm gonna comment on this chapter of this book, it's not gonna make an iota of sense to you unless you go read those racial categories, because they are the possible foundation for why Jenichiro Oyabe said the things he said. So, without further ado, I am going to read chapter 20, the last chapter in Jenichiro Oyabe's book, A Japanese Robinson Crusoe, as he titled it. So, without further ado, we're about to read it. Tall, strange-looking tropical trees, coconut and palms, are growing on the shore where burning lava once flowed like water and ran to the base of a horrible fire mountain. The natives are living very much like those in the South Sea Islands and have grouped together in their palm-thatched huts, which characterize their native villages. Each village has one or more maraes, which are enclosures served for cemeteries. In the middle is a temple where the priests alone have a right to enter. They contain several idols of wood, rudely sculptured. At the feet of these images are deposited and left to putrefy the offerings of the people, consisting of dogs, pigs, fowls, vegetables, etc. The respect of these savages for their priest extends almost to adoration. The immense number also lower class Japanese and Chinese on the island are worshipping their own idol gods with offerings and burning incense. The natives enjoyed their little island home and are living a quiet and easy life in a climate which is genial and wholesome, and upon soil whose fertility supplies them in return for but little labor, with all they want to eat and drink. If Paulston's lazy society still exists somewhere on this earth, all its members ought to make their annual excursion to such an island as I am visiting. I thought to myself, such was my vision concerning the Sandwich Islands until landing in Honolulu. Soon Diamond Head came to view, and with a few hours the Australia lay beside the great Honolulu wharf. My old friend, Secretary Emerson of the Hawaiian Board, came to meet me on board the steamer, and in his carriage I was taken to his residence, where I enjoyed the privilege of talking and eating together with this good, beloved brother. Honolulu is the capital of the Hawaiian Islands and the commercial emporium of the entire group. The city is very attractive, with many American and European residences, surrounded by large, beautiful velvet lawns and flower gardens, shaded by many graceful old trees. Electric light and telephone wires are stretching in various directions like spider net. Tram cars run through the principal streets, and steam cars will make tours to the neighboring localities. The government buildings, Queen's Hospital, Bishop Museum, Oahu College, Kamehameha School, Central Union Church, and other leading churches, hotels, and private residences are all in American and European style. If an American tourist should ascend Punch Bowl Hill and get a complete bird's eye view of the city, he would soon feel that he was wandering in one of his own southern states, and hardly believe he was on a small tropical island about 2,100 miles away from San Francisco. Soon after my arrival in Honolulu, I went to Alaini Palace with my doctor's introductory letter and met the president of the Hawaiian Republic. He is a tall, fine-looking gentleman, somewhere near 50 years of age, and has a thick mustache and long beard. He wore a black morning coat and white vest and trousers. His voice was low, and his way of talking was very careful and courteous. We talked about the present condition of the new republic and Japanese laborers on the plantations, and some other general subjects. The president invited me to call at his private residence and meet his wife. I hope you will soon feel at home and find many comforts and a good home right in this city, was his affable remark when I left his official chamber. I made several calls on American residents in the city to whom I was kindly introduced by my friends. Besides President Dole, I met Chief Justice Judd, Justice Fryer, Reverend Dr. Hyde, Reverend Meesers, Gulick, and Emerson, and many other leading persons in the capital. They are kind, amiable, sympathetic, and good-hearted men or angels who will undoubtedly get wings by and by in the other world. But their too good Christian character gave me a great disappointment. For my first plan of coming to the Hawaiian Islands was to defend Christian America from the dangers of heathen idolaters who live in that country. And for that reason I spent my precious time and money to reach the very spot to labor. When I met the Chief Justice, who was also the president of the Hawaiian Board of Missions, he had a long talk about the Hawaii, which was thoroughly Christianized, and also the conditions of her peaceful Chinese and Japanese subjects. My old anxieties faded away because Hawaii can defend America as a strong fortress without any assistance from a Japanese-blooded little Yankee like myself. For this and many other reasons, after observing the Japanese residents in Honolulu, I decided that I would not stay in such a Christian island. Shall I go back to America or return to Japan? I questioned myself, but the suggestion was too late for me, for I was now officially employed by the Hawaiian Board as one of their workers, and thus I was obliged to remain on the island. One day the secretary told me to present myself before the meeting of the Hawaiian Board. Why do they need to see me? I asked. Oh, the board will appoint you to take charge of the Lyceum Church in Honolulu as pastor. Then we will fix your salary, he said to me with a happy, friendly expression. No, indeed, no, I thank you. I rather prefer to be a country preacher somewhere in a quiet, home-like island, I said to my good old friend. At the same time, I remember the kind advice of the old New Haven professor, Dr. Day. Be as a coward and progress step by step. Also the story of Lot, how he covetously chose the city and destroyed himself. The secretary kindly advised me, however, to stay with him in Honolulu, but I did not agree to stay. Soon I was taken before the meeting of the board. The secretary reported my request to the officers, and at last I was ordered to take charge of a mission on the island of Maui. I had shaken off the dust from my sandals and left the busy capital by a small coast steamer, Claudine, and started for my new home on Maui, accompanied by a gentleman who was specially sent from the Hawaiian Board. When we arrived at the island of Maui, I asked my companion where we should go first to rest ourselves and get our meal. Oh, we are going first to the residence of Dr. Beckwith, he said. What, a reverend doctor in such a pumpkin-like island? I replied. Yes, sir. I tell you that he is one of the ablest men in this country. He was the founder and the pastor of Central Union Church in Honolulu. The doctor retired from his busy public life only because of his advancing age, said my friend. My heart was somewhat strengthened by it, for, though I had become now a lonely exile, I could get some comfort and instruction from such a good old minister. My friend and I soon arrived at the doctor's beautiful residence in Paia. We both were cordially welcomed by the gray-haired old American gentleman, whose appearance to my eyes was like St. John on the island of Patmos. We were introduced by him to his family, a tender-hearted wife, and a charming daughter who, afterwards, the good, humble Miss St. Knox. At the dinner, the young lady served us a delicious muskmelon. I was taken by surprise because when I left California, I bought plenty of seeds of it and intended to be called the first man who brought the seeds of muskmelon to the island. "Where did you get such foreign fruit?" I asked. "Dear me, such fruit is plenty everywhere on these islands, and you can eat them all you want," she said. If she had known my heart, she would have never spoken in that way and given me more disappointment. A young man is very apt to make plans without thinking very deeply about the result. But by such rashness, many good things are sometimes done. To visit Hawaii and also the introduction of muskmelon seeds were a failure. But from it I learned many lessons which the universities could not teach. By the kindness of the old gentleman, I met with several American friends on the island. Among them, I found two of my American relatives. One was the doctor's wife, Miss Beckwith, who was a dear sister of my first patron, the late General Armstrong. The other was a lovely Christian lady, Miss H.P. Baldwin, who was the cousin of Reverend Dr. Martin, the author of a Chinese book, which my father read and from which he was first led to the Christian faith. Truly, we must be kind to one another and try to do good with all people always, for wherever we go, we will meet unexpectedly with relatives and friends. A man cannot be altogether a recluse even though he stays in a small island to the sea. The Hawaiian Islands are situated under the Tropic of Cancer, and so the country must be hot. But the heat produced by a tropical sun is mitigated by the trade winds, which blow over a wide extent of ocean, and also by the cool current which returns from the region of Bering Straits. There's no summer or winter, but a delightful spring climate always. To foreigners, and particularly to consumptive people, the climate has proved of the most salubrious nature. A tourist should not forget to visit Punchbowl Hill, Diamond Head, Pali, and Waikiki. On the island of Oahu, Wailua, and Hanapepe Falls, Waikanaloa, and other wonderful caves on Kauai, Io Valley, Great Haleakala Mountain, Baldwin Villa in Olinda, Makawao Seminary, and sugar mills and plantations on Maui. The world-renowned leper settlement of Molokai, if he can secure permission from the Board of Health, and on the island of Hawaii, Kauailoa, the mountain of Captain Cook, Kilauea, the largest volcano in the world, boiling lakes, and beautiful little Coconut Island, etc. In such a real paradise of the Pacific, I made a temporary home, and for the first time since my mother's death, I enjoyed quiet, peaceful home life. Although in my new house there was none but myself and my cook, whose name I used to call Friday. It was not because my older brother Crusoe called his servant by that name, but because Friday was my resting day in the week. And generally I visited my American friends and took my square meals with them. So calling him Friday, I let my man understand that on that day he need not cook anything for me. One Friday afternoon, I took a long ride to Haiku and spent the evening with an American family. While we were taking dinner, there arose a conversation about a turtle. I told the mistress that in some islands in Japan there was a big turtle a great deal larger than her dining room table. The lady and the good old gentleman were greatly astonished and told me very distinctly that they could not believe such a story. I was surprised too, because I told this to amuse the old friends and to comfort their lonely island life. Soon after our dinner, the mistress said to her husband, "Now, George, You go to the other room and get from me all the books on natural history, encyclopedia, and Webster's dictionary. The books were brought before her, and she was busy finding out about the turtle, which she was told was as big as her dining room table. At last she said, "Listen to me, please. Webster and all other scholars and scientists do not mention such turtles as you have told us about. Although such a gigantic animal is occasionally found on the Hawaiian Islands, from which I drifted away some years ago, yet now I could not make her believe it. I had now a perplexity in my heart, and it troubled my mind very greatly. A sensible daughter of the house looked on my face very resentfully and said, 'Now, my friend, please do keep on. Do keep on. Don't let my mama call you a storyteller.' Soon the good-hearted Christian maiden's eyes were moist and her cheeks were in color, but I could not convince her mother, because Webster and others were all on the mistress's side, and to prove mine there was none. And so, after that, I was called a fish storyteller. The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. I had a very comfortable cottage on the hill. I called the place the Eden without Eve. I took that name either because there was no woman in the house, neither mother, nor wife, nor sister, nor maidservants. And of course there was no reason to follow after the misleading ideal of the Eden without Adam, which was found by an American woman doctor somewhere in the state of Illinois. I shall say that the organization was simply miserable, though it may be a paradise for an aged single lady. The cry, equality with man, is one of the mischiefs among modern college women. Some of them are trying to do exactly the same sort of work as the men in both study, gymnastic exercise, public service, and even in drinking and smoking habits. A century ago, in Japan, there was a peculiar fashion that the men tried to become like graceful women, and the result was public weakness and destruction. The American way of today is the reverse. Can a hen crow? Can a cock feed chickens? Or a cow fight with her horns? And a bull gently take care of a calf? Certainly not. We have hands and feet in the same body, but their work is entirely different from the other. So the woman's mission must be different from the man's, though we may both have equal rights as human beings. Well, discussing an entirely different subject and forgetting to tell my own story is as unwise as woman question itself. Once I heard from my father in Japan that he had a bad attack of rheumatism. He told me that he would soon come to my island home because the doctor advised him to change his place of residence to some warmer country. I was glad, and I had prepared all things for my long-forgotten father. I also decided that if he came to the islands, I should remain in Hawaii until my older father's last breath. I bought a piece of coffee land with a little cottage in a beautiful valley, also a small carriage and horse. When all things were ready for my father and I was daily expecting his arrival, there came suddenly an obituary report of that grand old judge. Now all plans for my father were vainly gone. Still, one hope remained for me. I am ready to die for the Christian cause. As Paul would say, I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. Although I was resting in a comfortable little island home and enjoying a peaceful life, yet every time I saw the vile conduct of some of my countrymen on these islands, my heart was pained with sympathy, but not so much for these people as for their mother country. I could not help crying. What a foolish man I am. I have become a true coward, for I am trying to get pure water by cleaning the lower part of the river. It would be wise to go up to its source if I want to have a nice, clean watered river. In other words, I'm trying to destroy a corrupt tree by cutting its leaves and branches, and not to cut its roots. One day I received a letter from my old doctor in Washington. In that letter, he said, "It is unfortunate that the Hawaiian Islands are so small, while you are so large. There seems to be a misfit somewhere. But perhaps the islands will increase in size or Jenichiro grow smaller. As he is a philosopher and poet, his language is very poetical. But such anxiety is very natural for an old gentleman who has been a teacher and companion with me for years. As the climate of the island is warm all year round, one can spend a whole year while he thinks that he is just enjoying one short summer month on a vacation. I had now spent over 2 years on the island, scarcely knowing that I had been there for so long. One rainy night, while I sat in my lonely study, burning the midnight lamp, this thought came to my mind, and with my custom, I noted it down in my memorandum. Though a mountain is high, yet it is worthless if it has no forest or trees. Though this world is large, yet if it is not inhabited by man, it is useless. Though a man possess physical beauty, yet without actions of a gentleman, there is nothing worthy of admiration. Today, as 2,500 years ago, to say of Confucius holds a gentleman you can tell by his actions only. Modern civilization is progressing wonderfully year after year, but at the same time, great evils are found in every phase of life. Every civilized country is building mighty warships and making terrible weapons for wholesome butchery. A sociologist claims that all religious teaching, including Christianity, are impossible of adaptation to modern society because each man must possess property for the support of himself and his family. If we give away what we have, according to teachings of the old religion, says a noted sociologist, practically, we should not have any property. We must gather as much money as we can for the support of our wives and children. Charity should begin at home. The result of such teachings naturally would be selfishness, insincerity, callousness, and corruption. Saints and moralists are disregarded, and hypocrites and rascals have the controlling power over modern society. There are, however, no other men so needful for us today as true philanthropists. Count Tolstoy is a Russian nobleman of high rank, yet he lives among the common people and is preaching the salvation of man. John Howard, whose last words were, "Let me be forgotten," was a good physician for poor sinners. So with Lord Shaftesbury, Peter Cooper, and Abraham Lincoln, and Jesus himself was the teacher of all. A man's earthly life is short. I must give this body and soul for the salvation of the poor and needy, and let my mouth speak for those people who cannot tell their needs. Such was my thought, and I made up in my mind then to leave the Hawaiian Islands, for my island life was too easy and too comfortable for me. Soon the news of my proposed departure spread among my friends. Many of them urged me to stay with them, but I could not do so. Of course, I called my people to our meeting house and addressed them. Then followed the Lord's Supper and my farewell. After giving all my household property to my Friday, the faithful servant, I started off for Honolulu. Warm friendship and kind hospitality was shown by my American and Japanese friends in Honolulu. Mr. Shiomura, the Japanese minister to Hawaii, gave me an official letter of recommendation to his government. A part of the letter reads as follows: "He came to these islands and preached the Christian doctrine, and his success has been so remarkable that he's been highly praised constantly both by Japanese and by foreigners in this country." On October 14th, 1897, I sailed from Honolulu for America in the steamer Alameda, for I had a desire to study a special branch of science at my favorite old university in New Haven. The sea was calm and peaceful, and I enjoyed the good company of the passengers. After 7 days on board the steamer, the Alameda brought us safely to San Francisco on the 21st day of the same month. Soon I took a fast train for New York by way of Washington so that I might see my good old friend Dr. Rankin in the capital. "Why, here's our Jenichiro. How did you get here? was his surprised greeting when I called at his residence. You ought to know my coming, for I sent you a letter from Honolulu a day before I left, I replied, but the doctor told me he had not received any letter. The reason was that I arrived at his house before the first mail came. Your quick moves are like a flying cherub. Tell me about the country and what good news you have of your work in Hawaii, said the old gentleman. The islands are beautiful, the climate is lovely, the people are kind and generous, and lastly, my work was successful, I said, and showed him a little bundle of complimentary letters. One of them reads as follows. Maui, Hawaiian Islands, October 9th, 1897. To whom it may concern. This is to introduce my dear friend and Christian brother, the Reverend Jenichiro Oyabe, to any good willing folk to whom this letter may come. I bespeak for him such kind consideration and fraternal helpfulness as it may be in any one's power to render. He has been the faithful pastor of the Japanese church in the parish under my pastoral care and under the support of the church which I minister. His labors among his countrymen here have been greatly blessed. He goes from us, to our great regret, to pursue a more extended course of study with a view to a wider field of usefulness in his native land. Receive him in the Lord as becometh saints. E.G. Beckwith, pastor of the Foreign Protestant Church at Makawao. Well done, my boy, well done. The Lord be with you. He will take care of you, was the doctor's kind word to me. I spent an evening with him, and early the next morning I started for New York and thence to New Haven. The city of elms is as grand as ever, and the great university stands in the midst of it as the mother of the nation. Since I left there in 1895, 2 fine college buildings have been added, namely Phelps and Pearson Halls. All my professors seem the same as they did when I was here some years ago. I devote myself now to the study of sociology and the more advanced branches of theology at the university. I have spent almost much time in the study of the American Indians, for I have a peculiar interest in these people, so similar to those in my country. Many years ago, when I read the lives of William Carey, Robert Morrison, and Dave Livingstone, I was greatly puzzled over the question as to how they ever got such queer notions of going among the savages and heathen. But how strange that I now have the same enthusiastic missionary zeal with which those men had. I have one passion, and it is he alone, I cried, as Count Zinzendorf of the Moravian mission exclaimed from his pulpit. I cannot tell why I have such a peculiar desire, except that I have naturally a strong sympathy for those who are weak and neglected, and also a profound admiration for a strong and manly character. This has led me to love Christ with all my heart, and also the helpless aborigines in my country. Dr. McKay, a missionary in Formosa, was passionately desirous of going to the heathen when he was in the seminary. So was the Reverend John Batchelor, a most devoted missionary in Yezu. If we asked these gentlemen why they had such uncommon notions, I am sure that their answer would be the same as mine. In Japan, the harvest is true is plenteous, but the laborers are few. And while I should mostly earnestly desire to work among the people here, the more urgent call comes to me from my native land. For the present condition of Christian churches, their press is heavily upon me. Yet it is in my sincere prayer to bring those unhappy men towards the light of civilization. May the grace and mercy of the Lord rest upon these people forever and forevermore. Almost 14 years ago, I wandered away from my father's house as a poor heathen, yet with a strong desire to go to America and secure a Christian education. And now I have successfully carried out the purpose with which I started. Here I have written my long story in English, which I did not learn from my mother's lips. In this narrative, however, I have not explained how I got money to feed and clothe myself in the different countries and among the foreign peoples. No one but God knows how I have managed during my wandering life. How was Daniel protected in the lion's den? God only knows. So, with my life, whence came I? Memory cannot say. What am I? A substance of God's hands, bound with her, return, and away to his hand in heaven. So, I've read the entire 20th chapter of A Japanese Robinson Crusoe by Jenichiro Oyabe. I'll go back one of these days and read what he says about Howard University, one of the oldest HBCUs in the country, because he really seems to downplay his time at Howard once he became well known in the clerical world here in the United States. That's my interpretation, but I will leave that up to you all. Please go research who Jenichiro Oyabe is. So let's get into it. I got 4 points in that whole chapter I want to discuss. Okay. The first one is his interesting opening about the Hawaiian Islands, because it seems like after this opening he doesn't talk much about native Hawaiians, if it ever at all. The reason that this is significant for that time is that there was a distinction between what is called yellow people and what is called brown people. Again, if you don't know who Johann Blumenbach is, you're going to have to Google him and look at his 5 racial categories, because this was a time of scientific racism and social Darwinism. By the time Jenichiro was around, he would have grown up with that notion that there are racial hierarchies, even if he did not come out and directly acknowledge it. He still seems to say these things in a roundabout way. So he is in essence a minister in what was a kingdom of Hawaii that had just become a territory and ultimately a state of the United States, but didn't really seem to interact directly with native Hawaiians. See, the thing we have to understand is that today, every May, we think nothing about celebrating Native America. No, I won't say Native America. I just got that wrong already. Pacific Islander Heritage and Asian Heritage Month, because the two things are combined. Sorry, I'm out of breath, y'all. It's Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You have to understand that going back 100 years or so ago, that a racial category separated them. One group is yellow and one is brown, and there's a distinction against that. Therefore, you'll have to go watch that Revisiting Blumenbach video from November 1st to understand what I mean by this. It's likely that Oyabe did not feel the solidarity with Native Hawaiians, and that could have indirectly, as a result of how society was living, played a part. I would leave it up to you guys to go read the book, because some things I stumbled on because I was short-winded, so I apologize. But today, this Asian American and Pacific Islander solidarity we have in the United States, there's a time when that didn't exist, and Jenichiro may have been hinting at that when he only briefly mentioned the natives of Hawaii, but never really mentioned in his few years there very much interaction with them, though he was a minister. The second one is the gender roles. When he brings up the stuff of women doing gymnastics and going to college, because we know at this time wealthier families were starting to send their daughters to college primarily to find husbands, though some women still balked at that. Small fringe groups. It's likely that he's hinting at his disdain for what we now know is first wave feminism, when most housewives who wanted to assert themselves as American citizens wanted the right to vote, but for the most part some still wanted to go home with their husbands. They just wanted recognition as citizens. He seems to indicate that he thinks allowing women to go to college represents a moral decay. I didn't write the chapter. You all can go read it. If I read into it the wrong way, let me know. But based on the time frame in which he lived, he seems to be taking a slight jab at first wave feminism. That's my interpretation of that. The third thing, his interesting statement about wanting to interact with Native Americans. The most telling thing is that he said he saw himself in these people. And now some article that's come out like not too long ago, because we know what we now call Native Americans crossed over, I think back when Alaska wasn't too far separated from what's now America or Canada 10,000 plus years ago. Okay. And now they're saying it's a possibility that some settlers from what we now call Southeast Asia may have been here and may also be a mixture of that. It was interesting that Jenichiro made that observation. If you missed that in my recording, I would advise you, if you can, to find an electronic copy if you don't want to buy his autobiography, because I bought me a copy, and read that. What made me particularly stand up and be like, is when he implied they were savages. And the reason that is distinctly important, because some aspects of the Blumenbach racial categories put Native Americans, whom he called Americans, as red people below black, brown, yellow, and white people. Again, this would have been natural for Oyabe because he was a product of his time. And this is how people truly thought. Whether I agree with it or not, this is how people thought. So because he saw himself in Native Americans, and he lived in that time of scientific racism and what groups of people were superior and inferior, it's likely that he didn't see anything wrong with his comment given the societal climate of the time, particularly since Blumenbach's racial categories had become the standard in that particular time in history of who's superior, who's inferior, who's going to be saved, so to speak, from a biblical standpoint, and who's a heathen. I hope that makes sense. Last but not least, I'm going to be honest with you, I have heard people use the term white adjacency. There are two things I'm going to say about this Robinson Crusoe book. And first, it's about Robinson Crusoe himself. I'm not going to spend long on that. I want you to go look up the mythical character of Robinson Crusoe. I think he was a British man who went to an island somewhere, got him a slave from what is now called Venezuela, named Friday. Again, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. Loved being out to sea, which is the exact same thing Jenichiro Oyabe hints at. And yeah, he compared himself to a mythical white man by naming the book A Japanese Robinson Crusoe. Now, some people could call that what you call white adjacency, and other people could just say he read that book from 1719 and more than a century before his time, and he just admired the story itself. Go look up him and decide that on your own. The second thing that Oyabe did that he did not deny in this chapter, in my opinion, is that he, in the beginning, if you recall what he said about the strangeness of the natives, but the advancedness of anything that was American and European, and that he only really took dinners at the house of mostly Americans and met mostly with American clergymen and dignitaries. But that he shared the gospel with Japanese that were already on the island, and he seems to praise the ones who'd come to Christianity and down the ones who engaged in what he says were heathen practices. Because Jenichiro Oyabe grew up poor in Japan, and at the time the United States showed interest in that country, it's possible that he came to understand the racial categories in time and saw nothing wrong with saying, oh, Europeans are this and that, because again, on that Blumenbach scale, at the top of that list is the Caucasian race. We are living scientific racism, and they had different views of what was civilized and what was not. Some of you might listen to this and say, this is a man that came from a great lineage or great culture in Japan, though he was poor. And you must remember, this is prior to World War II, when things would change and the dynamic would change. I'll leave it up to you all to make up in your mind who you thought Jenichiro Oyabe really was. But at best, I think this man could be a little bit dismissive. All right. I read the chapter based on the content of its time. If I took it out of context to you, let me know. Leave in the comments. You can keep your hateful comments, but you can bring commentary that's reasonable and discusses the subject. Thank you all for watching. Have a good one.